Hi, Mark. It is so great to see you again. The last time we met was at Sportel, I believe. You were telling me about the plans for obviously, we should be ramping up to the 2020 Olympics. You guys are going to be in the heyday glory of, finally a live Olympics after launching in Brazil. Obviously, things have changed. You are not in Madrid, you're in Atlanta. So wanted to say first, I hope that you and the family are doing well and everybody from the OBS team. But how have things been? And what was it like those early days in early March to early April when things were kind of, teetering and decisions were being made that were very difficult, but I'm sure your teams responded. So how are things going? I guess is the
Right.
first question.
Well, first of all, Ken, all is well. Everyone is healthy. Thank God. Hope the same for you and your family and loved ones. And yeah, we did. It seems like it's been years since Sportel last fall, with all that's gone on in the last 8 months, particularly in the last two. But it has been, we were on track to, as you said, we're going into our first summer games after having launched at the closing of the Rio Games. We've had two Yogs and we had the Pyeongchang Winter Games, but this was our first summer games that we were going to be live with the channel. And we have spent the better part of the last 18 months planning for the summer with a lot of our original programming. We also have some carve-out rights in certain territories that we can use on our platforms and on our social platforms. So all of that was part of our overall plan to lead up. And we had started to build great audiences, niche audiences, and gymnastics and swimming and track and field and some of the other sports. And we're continuing to try to do that. And it's, over the last 2 months, everything has kind of turned itself upside down. We've had to completely replan our whole strategy, our whole content flow. You mentioned, when we were back in Sportel, we talked about AllAround, which was our gymnastics follow doc with the 3 female gymnasts. We brought that to a conclusion with the final 2 episodes. We wrapped it up, and then we're going to pick it back up after, but in the lead up to Tokyo. And we will we'll come out with some other things that we think are going to be more timely. We had done so many athlete profiles leading into Tokyo that some may still be applicable, some may not, because the next year the athletes may change.
Right.
So that's kind of where we were.
Gotcha. Are they gonna do? If you qualify for this games, do you automatically qualify for the next ones, or they're not doing more?
I think it depends on the sport. It's up to each individual federation and how they're going to manage that. I think some have said, if you've qualified, you will maintain your spot. Obviously, there are those that hadn't yet qualified. I know the wrestling qualifiers. And the boxing, we were doing the boxing qualifiers. We were doing all the live coverage of the 5 continental, or the 4 continental qualifiers, and then the rapid charge, which we were having great viewership on in February and March. And those are going to have to be done at a later stage.
Right.
But, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how all that pans out over the next 12 months.
So for the AllAround show, which was, following these, it was 3, right? 3 gymnasts as they were kind of doing their practicing and trying to get on the teams, trying to qualify also, I believe. But how did the tone shift for those last couple of episodes? Because they deal with this whole situation, right? They don't just focus on let's just focus on the competitions. Let's focus on this bigger issue facing the world.
Well, in those last 2 episodes, that's what we focused on, was how could what is their plan going to be? They were the teams were going to be selected soon. They were our gymnasts were doing quite well in terms of being ready for Tokyo. So it was something that we were telling that story, and now those last 2 episodes we've had to shift and talk about how that they are going to reshift and redo their plans, and how they're going to continue on the path to Tokyo only 1 year later. So I think it's sad that it ended that way, obviously for everyone, but I think we've been able to improvise on that show.
Right.
We will have some good stuff coming back next spring.
Great. So what was the channel? What were those early days like as far as keeping the channel going, getting on air operationally? Because I'm assuming that people are not in the facility, in the control rooms. So what kind of changes had to be made? I know we've taken the whole concept of at-home production to a whole new level for everybody. So what are those early days like?
Well, I cannot be prouder of our technical and IT teams who, within a matter of about 48 hours of us announcing that we were going to institute remote working and making that mandatory, we were fully operational remotely without hardly anyone in the building. And it's a tribute to Jorge de la Nuez, our head of technical operations, and the OBS IT team, Dalmacio Tola, and all the people associated with them, that they really had us up and running without it. We haven't had one single hiccup. And that was even with live events, because we were still doing some live events for the first 3 or 4 days before the boxing qualifier was postponed, when we were out of the building. We were having to improvise with some of the commentators, because we did have the commentators in the building. So there was one session that we had to use just nat sound. We didn't have commentary, but then we started adding remote commentary, had commentators in London at the venue, which we hadn't had at the other qualifiers. So, the team performed way above and beyond what we could have ever hoped for. They were fabulous, and it still continues today. We're remote, and we've even introduced new technology. It's one of the things that we did. We in association with the Last Dance documentary, we took the opportunity to roll out every Thursday. We're doing a replay of the Team USA matches,
right?
And we're doing it with the Keysway technology. That we have Tom Kirkland sitting in his apartment in Madrid. We have Rob Perez of Action Sports Network, who's somewhere in his house in the U.S., and they're commentating over those live matches. And it's been a big success. We've been streaming it on Twitter, getting, I know we're over, I think a couple of million views. We're getting good engagement on our platform. So that's something that we just said, let's try it. And it's worked. So it's been great.
Let's try it as the official new motto of every sports network. And
that's right.
What's your sense as far as how all the OTT and streaming services have all kind of responded with really interesting programming ideas, some of it inspired, some of it not so inspired, but it's been really interesting to see the dynamics of content creation kind of change and evolve. So when you look at the bigger picture of the whole industry, what's your sense on how everybody's done as far as keeping sports fans engaged? And, is the messaging different in this era versus, obviously you'll be gearing up for the Olympics, but is the messaging still different to inspire and still kind of, entertain, but yet also educate? And there's a lot of interesting things to be done.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think for us, we have tried, one of the more successful things that we did about a month ago, early on in this, is that we started instituting what is called a Stay Strong social campaign. And that Stay Strong social campaign is basically taking athletes who are confined and doing home workouts and re-amplifying and reposting and showing them with these amazing ways that they're staying healthy and active and strong during these times. And, when you look at just the total cutoff of any sport action whatsoever, it really makes you realize how much sport and these fabulous athletes and the camaraderie and teamwork all mean to everyone, and how much they miss it. You've seen, at least in the States with the NFL draft and the WNBA draft and the Jordan documentary, how those numbers
right.
have just gone through the roof, more so than they ever have. And then when Bundesliga's back, I think Bundesliga has done some great numbers. The golf over the weekend,
yep,
was huge.
Yep.
So I think everybody's had to refocus. They've had to make sure that they're bringing out the right tone of archives. They're trying to get people, and we saw our numbers fall off pretty dramatically the last part of March and April. But against some of our benchmarks and peer groups, we didn't fall as much, because I think, we had some good original programming that was still out that people were resonating with. But, no one, for that first month, no one cared about sports, even though, they missed it so much. They were all watching on the news. They were watching Netflix. They were doing whatever it was that would either get them up to speed on what was happening or take them completely out of this new world and fall into some Netflix series. So
right.
It was interesting how we adapted that.
So is there anything, in that kind of situation, and people in your position, management, right? So you're supposed to lead, inspire the team, and also draw up on past experiences, right? And so sometimes it's saying, oh, I remember 1975 when this happened, or, but this is a very unique situation. But is there anything from your past that you can kind of draw upon that was similar, that can kind of feed into helping either keep people more relaxed or just sort of keep the ship steady and sailing straight?
Well, it's interesting because, I look back at, the Salt Lake games and 9/11. And 9/11 happened 5 months prior to the opening ceremony of Salt Lake. And it was a similar dynamic, but it was completely different. In that instance, it was, will the games take place? But the conviction was the games must take place. These things must happen because we have to overcome the threat of terrorism, and it would be a great symbol. And it was a bit the opposite with Tokyo. The sentiment was, how can any sport happen now? And how do you juxtapose that against a willingness to go forward, all committed toward getting something done, as opposed to trying to figure out how to shut everything down and do it in the least disruptive way. So It was, I don't think no one's ever had to deal with something like this. Hopefully never again as well. And hopefully it won't be an issue next summer. That we'll get beyond this, and things will slowly come back, and things will hopefully be back to as normal as we possibly can next summer.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I live here in Manhattan, obviously, and on 9/11 I was in the city, and I had, that night 7 people slept in my apartment. It was a 1-bedroom. They couldn't get home, and I can recall going down the stairs that night to go out for beers because people were like, I just need something. And then on the door, as you're leaving the door, there was a sign that said, if you want to donate plasma or blood, down the street, the hospital. And it was like really just like shocking. It just kind of hit you that this is different, clearly. And the situation is obviously very different too. And I think by the time we get to next July, God willing, that everything's going to be cleared up and we're going to have the Olympics. But what's your sense on what the storytelling will be, not only for that, but for every sport coming back, right? Because you have this tragedy, and then there's a, I don't want to say an opportunity, but there's an emotional attachment to that then your goal as a programmer is to create content that resonates emotionally. You're going to have thousands of stories from all around the globe related to this. So what's your sense as far as how it might change your storytelling as you get closer to the games? The interviews with the athletes will probably be different. The questions will be different. What's your sense on sports in general?
Yeah, I think we need to focus on the resiliency and the dedication of of all these athletes, because they've gone through something, that is unprecedented. Some of them, the Olympics and it comes around every 4 years for these athletes. They've been working, some of them, all their lives, but over at least the last 2 or 3, they've been on regimented training schedules to peak at a certain time,
right,
and get at the top performance for this summer. And now they've had to completely change that. So I think we'll focus on them. They're what the games are about. They're the stories that we will continue to tell. It's got a different spin on it now. We've always talked about the obstacles and overcoming and being against all odds, and how they're such amazing athletes. And I think we just have another element to add to that, to show how effective and how resilient they have been and will be.
Right. But I mean, when you think about how 9/11 was such a singular, I mean, granted, it was a global thing in on some scale, but it's also very much an American thing, to your point with Salt Lake City. But you imagine, I mean, if you think about the Olympics and just the opportunity for all the nations to come together in that stadium in Tokyo and kind of celebrate sport, the end of hopefully this pandemic, I mean, it could be quite the amazing story.
Oh, it would be, if it were. Yeah, I'm getting chill bumps now just thinking about it. I hope that Tokyo isn't the culmination of, but if it is, that would be fabulous. I'm hoping that we can start to see a gradual comeback of leagues and competition. I think a few minutes before we started the call, the NHL just announced that they weren't going to continue with this season. I know the NBA is working on a plan. La Liga is announcing that they're coming back, I think, in June. All the other events that are supposed to happen over the summer, and hopefully, we will get a lot of these events back in place with some sort of spectators, whether or not it's full stadium or half full or a quarter full. But yeah, Tokyo being back that would be phenomenal if it could be. I hope it happens before, because that would be beneficial to everyone. But yeah, that would be a great moment.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you, Mark, so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Again, stay healthy. And you and the rest of the OBS team. I'll give you a last word. Is there anything you want to say to the OBS team and to the Olympic Channel team as far as?
Well, there's one last thing that I have to mention as part of our programming. We have next week the Rulon Gardner 5 Rings film coming out, which in this environment of stay strong, if there ever was someone who epitomized staying strong as an athlete and as a human being, it's Rulon Gardner. And that film debuts on June 3rd. And we got some great things planned with Rulon. We'll then also have another 5 Rings films that is premiering in a We Are One YouTube Film Festival, I believe on June 7th. It's called The Iron Hammer, which is about Lang Ping, who was a Chinese volleyball player and then a coach. She won a gold medal as a player and a coach, and she coached both the Chinese team and the USA team. So one of the things that we've done is try to, knowing that people's viewing habits has been, with live sport gone, we put these 2 finishing touches on these 5 Rings films so that we can debut those. And for our teams, they have stayed strong, they have stayed healthy. They've stayed very active, and they've stayed at the excellent level of work that they've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. So really proud of our team for doing that.
Excellent. Great. Well, thanks again so much for your time, and hopefully see you soon somewhere in person.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Same to you.
Well, thanks.